All right, let's jump right into this explainer on the masterstroke of Kwajalein and how Tarawa's tragedy actually built a flawless victory. Look, most of us know the heavy, tragic names of World War II battles, right? Iwo Jima, Okinawa, Tarawa. But today, we're going to look at a major battle that history largely forgot, and it's forgotten precisely because of how flawlessly it was executed. It's this incredible story of how an absolute nightmare on a tiny island forced American commanders to just completely rewrite the rulebook, and in the process, they saved thousands of lives.
So, set the scene. On December 14, 1943, Admiral Chester Nimitz is sitting in a conference room at Pearl Harbor, and he's with three of America's finest military minds: Vice Admiral Raymond Spruance, Rear Admiral Richmond Kelly Turner, and Marine General Holland Smith. Nimitz proposes skipping the outer Marshall Islands entirely to strike straight at the center atoll, Kwajalein. And man, their reaction was brutal. I mean, they told him right to his face that his plan was dangerous and outright reckless. They practically begged him to just stick to the script and take the outer islands first.
Part 1. The Reckless Decision. So why was Nimitz so dead set on making this call when his top guys were so against it? Well, to understand his mindset, we really have to look at the intelligence his team had just uncovered.
What's really fascinating here is the psychology of the enemy. Aerial photographs revealed that the Japanese had heavily fortified the outer islands of the Marshalls, places like Wotje, Maolap, Jaluit, and you have to ask, why? Because they analyzed the cautious, methodical, island-hopping approach the Americans had been using up to that point, and they fully expected them to take those near islands first. But by concentrating all their forces on that outer ring, they left their central headquarters, Kwajalein, structurally weaker. Nimitz saw that opening. But here's the thing. His urgency wasn't just about military strategy. It was actually deeply personal.
Part 2. The Ghosts of Tarawa. To truly grasp what was driving Nimitz here, we have to flash back just 3 weeks prior to that tense meeting in Pearl Harbor. We have to go to a tiny strip of coral on the Gilbert Islands called Betio, which is part of the Tarawa Atoll.
The Battle of Tarawa was, quite frankly, a horrific bloodbath. The Marines fought for 76 straight hours and more than 1,000 Americans died. But, as Nimitz learned when he personally walked that completely obliterated island, it wasn't a failure of courage at all. It was a failure of planning. See, a neap tide, which is something that happens only 2 days a year, held the water level unexpectedly low over the reef. The landing craft basically just scraped to a halt 800 yards from shore. Just imagine that for a second. 800 yards. The Marines had to climb over the sides and wade through chest-deep water under relentless, direct Japanese machine gun fire the entire way. Nimitz carried the massive weight of that 800-yard walk back with him to Pearl Harbor. His desk was literally overflowing with hundreds of letters from grieving parents all across America. And the absolutely crucial point here is he didn't let his aides hide those letters. No, he read every single one. Letters screaming at him, "You killed my son." He personally wrote back to every one of them. He went to the hospitals. He sat with maimed and dying 19-year-olds. Nimitz knew taking Tarawa was strategically necessary for the war effort, but he made a vow to never, ever let an execution like that happen again.
Part 3. 5 vital lessons learned. Out of that immense grief came rigorous, calculated action. Nimitz's planners drafted an operating manual that was bluntly titled 100 Mistakes Made on Tarawa. Every man who died there essentially contributed a line to this master plan for the rest of the Pacific War. So, here is exactly how they built a flawless assault plan for Kwajalein. First off, instead of just 3 hours of high-explosive surface shells, they ordered 3 days of armor-piercing naval bombardment that was actually designed to shatter concrete bunkers. Second, they'd attack from the lagoon side, totally bypassing the heavy seaward defenses the Japanese had built up. Third, they would seize tiny surrounding islets the night before just to set up land-based artillery. Fourth, they deployed underwater demolition teams to map the reefs and blow up obstacles beforehand. And fifth, they massively upgraded their amphibious tractors, the LVTs, so they could cross the coral regardless of what the tide was doing. 5 major structural changes, all paid for by the lives lost to Tarawa.
Part 4. Point-blank naval warfare. Now, having a great plan on paper is one thing, right? But you still need commanders out there willing to execute it with absolute conviction. And that brings us to Rear Admiral Richard L. Connolly.
Connolly had this very blunt belief: you cannot destroy a hardened concrete bunker by lobbing shells at it from 2 miles away. The shells just arrive at an angle and basically rattle the roof. To truly destroy it, you need a flat trajectory. You literally need to hit the bunker right in the face. So to get that flat trajectory,
Connolly ordered the battleship USS Mississippi to pull within 1,500 yards of the Japanese shore. To put that in perspective, that is under a mile. That is well within range of the enemy's coastal guns. And his exact signal to the USS Maryland was a total break from any sort of precise naval code. He literally just signaled, "Move in really close." He risked his multi-million-dollar battleships and his sailors specifically to save the Marines on the beach. And you know what? It worked. At that nearly point-blank range, 14-inch shells disintegrated individual palm trees and completely blew apart those reinforced concrete blockhouses. Connolly actually earned the nickname Close-In Connolly for the rest of his life just because of this one defining moment.
Part 5. The Ultimate Sacrifice. But despite all this overwhelming firepower and brilliant tactical planning, the reality of ground combat always comes down to the individual human beings on the sand. On February 1, 1944, the ground assault on Roy Island, which is the northern part of the Kwajalein Atoll, finally began.
Among the men hitting the beach that day was Private First Class Richard B. Anderson. He was a mortarman from a tiny town in Washington state, just a kid who enlisted 7 months after Pearl Harbor, and he had this tattoo on his arm with 4 words, "Death before dishonor." On that afternoon, for reasons no one could ever fully explain, Anderson found himself separated from his rear mortar unit and right up at the front lines, moving across a burning, cratered airfield carrying a box of grenades. Anderson dropped into a massive bomb crater for cover, joining 3 other Marines who were already in there. He reached for a grenade, pulled the pin, stepped up to throw, and his hand slipped. The live grenade tumbled right to the bottom of the crater. There was no time to throw it out, no time to climb away. In a fraction of a second, the 22-year-old made his choice. He threw his body over the grenade, absorbing the entire lethal force of the blast. Those 3 other men in that crater, they walked off the island alive because of him. He was posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor, fulfilling the promise of the ink on his arm. Part 6. The Battle History Forgot. The raw sacrifice of men like Anderson, combined with Nimitz's refusal to heed his cautious advisors, and Connolly's incredibly aggressive naval gunfire, resulted in an operation that shocked even the planners who designed it in the first place.
Look at these numbers. The final accounting is just staggering. Tarawa was a smaller island with 4,500 defenders. It took 76 hours of fighting and cost over 1,000 American lives. Kwajalein, on the other hand, was a much larger atoll with 8,000 defenders, but the island of Roy fell in just 7 hours. Across the entire massive Kwajalein operation, total American deaths were 372. That is less than a third of the casualties against nearly double the enemy force. Nimitz finished weeks ahead of schedule. Refusing to repeat past mistakes directly saved hundreds, if not thousands, of young men.
So it really begs the question, why don't we talk about Kwajalein more? Why isn't it a household name like Iwo Jima or Guadalcanal? Well, because history is kind of drawn to tragedy, isn't it? History remembers the battles where the price was the absolute highest, where the casualty lists were the longest, where the photographs were the most devastating. Kwajalein was almost won too cleanly. It's the battle history forgot, simply because the planning actually went exactly right.
But you know, to the families of those 372 men who didn't come home, it was the only battle that mattered. Did your family serve in the Pacific? We'd love for you to share their untold stories in the comments before those memories disappear forever. And it leaves us with a pretty provocative question to chew on. Why do we only build monuments to our greatest tragedies while letting our most brilliantly engineered successes just fade into the background? Thanks so much for learning with me today.